And so now I will turn it over to Javier Padilla-Reyes, the Commission's Environmental Justice Manager, to present this month's spotlight. Javier.
Thank you, Dr. Hulkebridge. And if we can have that PowerPoint presentation up, please. Yeah. Okay. Can we have that presented? Okay, thanks. Thank you again, and good morning, Commissioners. We're very excited to kick off this initiative by showcasing our agency's environmental justice work and key accomplishments. Now, this presentation offers a high-level look at the policy and the program, and if you'd like more detail, check out the full retrospective in this month's ED report. Next slide, please. Before we begin, allow me to introduce our unit. My name is Javier Padilla, and I'm the Environmental Justice Manager. With me today is our Environmental Justice Analyst, Chinonso Uzowihe. It's his first presentation before the Commission. And you just heard about a new addition to our EJ unit. This is Courtney Owen, our Tribal Affairs Coordinator. And lastly but not least, our astute legal counsel, Jessica Reed. I'm going to hand it over to Chino so that he can go over the background of the policy.
Next slide, please. By now, you're probably familiar with the origins of the Coastal Act. It was mandated by the people, for the people, to protect coastal access and public access to the coast while also ensuring those benefits extend to all Californians. Yet, despite this victory, the vision of access for all people had not yet been fully realized. Disproportionate environmental burdens were still taking place as a result of discriminatory land use and systemic inequalities. Communities experiencing these issues advocated for decades that more needed to be done to address this. Next slide, please. This momentum came to a head in 2009 when the construction of a power plant was proposed on the coast of Oxnard, California. Local opponents of the project argued that Oxnard was already facing more pollution than many areas in the state, and this would place a disproportionate burden on their city without any clear benefits. Community members, as well as local officials, united in opposition to the project, citing environmental injustice as a key consideration. However, the Coastal Act did not allow the Commission to consider environmental justice. Staff and commissioners realized these limitations, and we have a brief video that highlights the moment Commissioner Burke expresses this regret and makes a commitment to change things. The next slide, and please play the video.
Peter, every time that you say that an issue is not to be used under the Coastal Act, it makes me cringe, especially an issue like environmental justice. Now, I know you're absolutely right, and I know it's not your fault, you know, and I know you have to say it because you're the purveyor of the law. But I'm stating on the record tonight that tomorrow I'm going to use every ounce of influence I have to make sure that the Coastal Act is amended to include environmental justice as an issue to be encountered, because it's just not logical that we're protecting rocks and not people. Just not logical.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
Peter.
7 years later, in 2016, the legislature passed AB 2616 with the strong support of the Coastal Commission, EJ organizations such as Azul, CAUSE, and the City Project, and other EJ and environmental groups committed to the equitable distribution of coastal benefits for all people. The bill integrated existing EJ principles and civil rights law into the Coastal Act, and specifically allowed commissioners to consider environmental justice when acting on permits and appeals. It also required the governor to appoint an environmental justice commissioner, the first of which was Commissioner Turnbull Sanders, and is now Commissioner Lee. Next slide, please. And there's an animation on this slide, so one more click, please. Thank you. Once this legislation was passed, the agency moved to develop guidance on how we would implement this new consideration for EJ. It took staff over 2 years to draft this guidance, with staff from each district office participating and extensive outreach to stakeholders across the state being incorporated. This culminated in the Commission's adoption of the agency's first ever environmental justice policy in 2019. The policy also defined EJ, and you can see that definition here, It is grounded in the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of circumstance. As an outgrowth of this policy, the Commission was able to create the EJ Unit, which works to implement these core tenets in our work every day. Next slide. We'd now like to highlight the current state of the EJ program. Last week, we released a report that inventories key actions and outcomes achieved over the past 6 years as mandated by the EJ policy. The report is tied to this presentation, as we'll be touching on a few accomplishments since the inception of the EJ program. However, this is not an exhaustive review. If you would like to learn more, we encourage you to take a look at the Executive Director's report for the full review that goes in depth on actions and outcomes. I'll hand things over to Javier to speak on our approach to EJ implementation. Next slide.
Thank you, Gino. As you mentioned, when the EJ policy was being drafted, advocates pushed for including 34 implementation actions and a timeline to complete them. These actions were categorized into the 5 pieces of the pie that you see here. We'll briefly dive into these categories and highlight some key actions and outcomes. Next slide. The first of these approaches focuses on engagement with affected communities. Next slide. We're only highlighting some examples of our many engagement efforts. Aside from reaching out directly to impacted communities on a project-by-project basis, we host quarterly calls with our EJ partners, led by our Executive Director and the Environmental Justice Unit, with over a dozen environmental justice organizations statewide participating. We've hosted 11 of these to date, and it is an excellent space to speak directly to staff and leadership, and for us to learn about what's going on in their communities. We've also created and staffed a Spanish program, and that helps with outreach, meetings, and our monthly bilingual EJ newsletters, which highlights upcoming projects of environmental justice interest. Next slide. Next up is building staff capacity to understand and apply environmental justice principles. Next slide. One of our first actions since the adoption of the policy was to fund 3 positions, the EJ analyst, the EJ manager, and deputy director. We then held an in-person EJ training for all staff in early 2020. We've created onboarding training materials and district refresher trainings. We've developed resources on a number of topics to support staff with understanding and applying the principles of environmental justice into their work, and this has worked. From rank and file to executive staff, our staff is committed to championing environmental justice principles into the Commission's work. Next slide. Next implementation approach focuses on the integration of environmental justice directly into the coastal development process. Next slide. Broadly speaking, the Environmental Justice Unit supports agency staff during project review to identify environmental justice populations, contact these communities, evaluate their concerns, and create conditions or modifications that aim to correct the historical burdens that environmental justice communities face when experiencing the coast. We support local governments also by making environmental justice a priority for local coastal program assistance grants. We've also created some resources to incorporate environmental justice and even publish our own mapping tool that helps with the identification of environmental justice populations and concerns so everyone can use it. This is called the Coastal California Environmental Justice Mapping Tool, and it is available on our website. Next slide. The environmental justice policy also calls for meaningful and diverse participation from the public. Next slide. Not too long ago, you had to come in person to provide public comment. COVID changed all of that. But before that ever happened, the Commission provided its first ever remote testimony to accommodate lower income workers in Marina who were not able to take the day off to travel and testify in person about a controversial project in their town. The current switch to hybrid meetings for hearings has helped increase across access for all who wish to participate in the Commission's decision-making process. And to support access, we've also worked to enhance the experience of the public participation. We've improved wayfinding signage at meetings, including the use of graphics and multiple languages. We've simplified public commentary sign up and hosted a well-attended webinar on public participation with our partners. Since the establishment of the Spanish translation program, we have also seen an uptick in Spanish speakers that are participating in our hearings, to the point where we've held multiple hearings with live interpretation. Next slide. And finally, the last piece of the pie was the integration of environmental justice into our strategic plans and to incorporate public input through that process. Next slide. To that end, we've integrated environmental justice into both the previous and the newly adopted strategic plan with plenty of public participation. Lastly, we have published yearly year-end reviews for the environmental justice program since 2019 to increase transparency in our implementation. Next slide. As you'll read in our retrospective, we've learned a lot since the adoption of the environmental justice policy. We've completed and continue to carry out the goals within the policy, and we have found areas where we can frankly improve. Our priorities are in alignment with the agency's recently adopted strategic plan. So we want to continue to grow our outreach and bring in more people to the table and expand language access. We also want to continue to strengthen equitable access to prevent and remove barriers and uplift lower cost access opportunities. We seek to increase accountability and transparency through concentrated analysis of our ongoing implementation, and we hope to build internal capacity by fostering an inclusive and diverse workplace. And lastly, to advance stewardship by working to address the disproportionate burdens experienced by environmental justice communities. And I'd like to take this last second to thank all of those who have supported this work and continue to advocate externally and internally at the Coastal Commission. Together, we are shifting the currents towards a safe and equitable coast for all. Thank you very much.